All right. Okay, thanks everyone for sticking around. It's our last panel of the day before dinner. As you know, this is Palestine at the UN, the question of diplomacy. I'm Salim Arakat, the ADC OC chapter president. I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers, let them talk about themselves, and then we'll jump right into it since we're a bit behind today. On the end there, I have Abdul Halim Siam. He's a current lecturer at of Political Science and Middle Eastern Studies at Rutgers University. Since 2007, he's taught courses on the UN and the Middle East, Islam, democracy, contemporary politics of the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and media in the Arab world. He was also a regular commentator on Al Jazeera, BBC, France 24, and other media outlets. Prior to joining Rutgers, Abdul Hamid worked at the United Nations in a number of roles, including political affairs officer and spokesperson for the for the UN mission in Western Sahara, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. In the middle, I have Dr. Riyad Mansour. He currently serves as the permanent observer for the State of Palestine at the UN, a position he was appointed to in 2012. Dr. Mansour was born to a refugee family that lived in the city of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank and moved to the US in 1967 to attend college. In 1983, he began his career with the Palestinian Diplomatic Service at the Permanent Observer Mission of the Palestine Liberation Organization to the UN, and was appointed Ambassador and Permanent Observer of Palestine to the UN in 2005. Dr. Mansour received a Master of Science degree in Education Counseling from Youngstown State University in 1973, and a Doctorate of Philosophy and Counseling in 1977 from the University of Akron. Dr. Mansour is fluent in both Arabic and English and has published multiple studies on the Palestinian community in the United States. As I said, we're going to talk about Palestine and the UN, and specifically the work of Dr. Mansour as a diplomat and Mr. Siam as a UN-based media person. First, I'm going to let each panelist introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in. We start on the end.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Abdul Hamid Siam from a village near Jerusalem, and now I am an accredited journalist to the United Nations on behalf of the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi that is based in London. I took this position as Bureau Chief of Al-Quds Al-Arabi in 2014, and I will be talking basically about my experience as a journalist accredited to the United Nations. Prior to that, I worked for the United Nations for about 26 years. I was assigned to field missions. Most importantly, my last mission was in Iraq. And during this mission, after the war immediately, we were the first group to arrive in Iraq in June 2003. Me and my colleagues were in the UN headquarters. It's called Canal Hotel. And on August 19, the first terrorist attack on that UN headquarters. Luckily, I just left the building, but my colleague who came from New York to replace me arrived the night before, and she was killed on her first day. Following that incident, which shook my life altogether upside down, I decided to leave the UN. And I started teaching at Rutgers and writing a weekly article in Al-Quds Al-Arabi starting 2008. And I still, even today, my article for tomorrow has been already published. So my path crossed many times with Riyad. He also came to the UN as a diplomat. I was a staff, he was a diplomat. I left the UN, I came back as a journalist. He's the ambassador for Palestine. Our work complement each other, and we will talk about that in the briefing. Thank you.
It is on? Yeah. Very good. First of all, you know, the lights are very strong, and I'd like to see the people in the room and not to be blinded, you know, by the light. But let me begin by saying I want to thank the ADC for inviting me another time to come to your conference. I believe that I attended your conference in this hotel a few years ago. It was a delightful experience, and I was invited to so many conferences in Washington, D.C. So I am grateful for the opportunity of being invited to be with you in your conference. I am here speaking to you in my capacity as the ambassador of the State of Palestine to the United Nations. I'm restricting myself to that arena. That is the arena where I operate and where I defend the rights of the Palestinian people and accumulate to the accomplishments of those who were before me during the long march of our struggle at the diplomatic front at the United Nations, along the steadfastness and the struggle of our people on the ground in the occupied Palestinian territory and among the refugee communities outside Palestine. Of course, I don't need to add to the introduction. I think it's sufficient. But I want to add to it that I am always proud that I am like many of you. My father came as an immigrant after the 1948 war and became a steel worker in Ohio, and he worked very hard in order to provide for his family. So I am proud of that background in which I was brought in a modest family that worked very hard in order to provide for the kids, provide us with education, and therefore success. And I believe that that is the story of many people who are in this room and outside this room. I think that as immigrants, whether Palestinians or Arabs, we are very resilient. Our parents and grandparents came with limited resources, but they were very hard workers, and they were able to transmit this into their children. And as Amir last week said in introducing Dalal for a concert, he said, we are very successful, resilient community, and he is correctly so. Usually, immigrant communities, they tend to be very successful, they excel, and they hold very important positions, whether in the academic field or in the professional fields, such as doctors and what have you. And that is a huge asset for advancing the cause of justice, not only for the Palestinian people, but also all important subjects that are very important to the Arab American community. The other thing that was not included, that I am also from a refugee family, and I am proud of the fact that I am a Palestine refugee. My family is a Palestine refugees. These backgrounds to me are more important than my academic accomplishment, although all of them are very important. I guess, I will get into the subject before you ask me the questions, and then maybe you can ask the questions. Unless, you want me to do it the other way around. Which way do you prefer?
I was going to start with some questions. If you
okay, start with some questions.
My first question is going to be some background, so I think it's probably going to be the answer you're about to give. But let's start with, we're currently a permanent observer. We discussed the other day the steps that we're taking, or the steps that you're taking, in order to be granted full member status. Where are we in that process?
I personally was a member of the Palestine National Council in 1988 when the council declared, after the first intifada, the independence of the State of Palestine. I was a junior diplomat at that time, but I was of the opinion that it was a historic moment to change our status from an observer entity of the PLO to an observer State of Palestine. Unfortunately, I was among the minority. I was overruled. When I had the opportunity to come back in the year 2005 as the ambassador of the State of Palestine, that was one of the ideas in my head, that now I'm in a better position to be able to contribute significantly to accomplishing the issue of the State of Palestine. And I played, along with many, very important role in stacking a number of countries to recognize the State of Palestine from the year 2006 until the year 2011, which allowed us to, number one, in 2011, to join UNESCO as a state, and in the year 2012, to become an observer state. For me, that the issue of the state has to be accepted by the international community, to be followed by actually becoming a full member of the UN system. So in the year 2012, we changed our status to an observer state by 138 votes voted in favor and only 8 votes voted against us. The importance of becoming a state, whether it is an observer state or a full member state, that would allow you to join the ICC, to join so many conventions and treaties as a state party to such conventions. And in my opinion, at the international arena, that should be in line with the struggle of our people who were trying everything possible to put an end to the occupation and therefore to acquire our natural and legal right to become a member state. Of course, we waited 10 years since 2012. We are in 2022. During these 10 years, we proved to those who are not yet convinced that we deserve to be a full member at the United Nations as a state, we proved to them of our responsible, creative, qualified leadership at the UN, including we became the chairman of the Group of 77 on China, which is a negotiating group in the UN system of 134 countries, comprising 80% of humanity in terms of population, and discussing in these days 70% of the agenda of the United Nations. And we received a high praise from the Secretary General for our role because it was the first time in the history of the UN under our leadership, the Fifth Committee, which is the Finance Committee of the UN, was able to agree on the budget on time through consensus before the Christmas break. So we are saying for those who think that we do not deserve or not ready to be a member state, we are saying that we waited for 10 years, we proved our conduct and our qualifications, so therefore we believe that it is our natural right, our legal right, number one, to be a member state because there is global consensus in the UN over the two-state solution, and two, that is a concrete practical effort to try to save the two-state solution because the Israeli occupation is destroying it and changing the reality into an apartheid reality. So that is the reason why we took an initiative now in the midst of the occupation of the United Nations of the Ukraine situation. We don't want the Palestine question to be marginalized. We have to think in a creative way, in a concrete way, in such a way where there is consensus, because at the UN there is consensus on the two-state solution, including by the US government, and there is consensus that settlements are illegal and that Israel should stop this illegal behavior. So therefore, creative thinking would allow you, in these difficult times in which the international community is preoccupied with Ukraine, that you need to initiate ideas and suggestions to keep your question alive on the basis of the total agreement of all states. I know some of those who are believers of the two-state solution are reluctant to grant us full membership, but we are engaging them. We will continue to engage them. And if they continue to close the doors and the windows before us in the Security Council, the place where they have the veto. I am coming to them to the place where they are so strong. And I'm telling them, work with me for a reasonable progress in the direction of giving the Palestinians what they deserve. And if they refuse to work with me in the place where they are stronger than me because of the veto, then they should not blame anyone but themselves when they push me to go to the bigger house, to the General Assembly, where I am stronger and I am capable to do many things. And I don't want to dwell on these things now. Everything will come at the appropriate time, but we have capabilities and we have strength. But all of that, we do it to complement and support the steadfastness and the struggle of our people in the ground. And with these two things together, I am confident that one of these days, Israel will be forced to withdraw from the land that they occupied in 1967, including East Jerusalem, and the Palestinian people will get what they deserve, which is independence and freedom and dignity in their own independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. How about that as an introduction?
Before I ask, I just have one quick follow-up. Why have we not already gone to the General Assembly then? Do you see any inkling of hope that we're going to get past the Security Council, or should we bypass that? It's been 10 years. Why haven't we moved directly to the General Assembly if you believe we have the support there?
I think that that is a good question. But for those of you who would have the privilege of working as diplomats in a place like the United Nations, the name of the game is not to be in a hurry to do what you want to do. You have to win almost everyone to be with you. Everyone is not interested in you to go so quickly and to appear that you want to butt head with this country or that country. If you act patiently, but tenaciously, and you stay the course, and you try to mobilize as many countries to be with you, and then when the moment is right that you tried everything possible and you showed all the flexibility possible, but not compromised on what you want, but on the tactics of how to accomplish it. And when they refuse to show some reasonableness, and then you move to the General Assembly, you will be paving the way for your big success in the General Assembly, because you spend all the necessary time to engage everyone, to respond to their question in the Security Council, and to work with them. But when they close all the doors and the windows, no one will blame you for going to the General Assembly. This art, you had a panel of artists, and they are beautiful workers in doing what they're doing. They do not paint something without them feeling that it is coming out from their heart to produce a masterpiece. In our work, I have to make sure that we succeed. And to succeed, you have to do your work very diligently, very convincingly, very patiently, and not to leave a stone unturned until either you succeed or nobody would blame you to go to the next phase. And even when you go to the next phase, you are capable of doing a lot of big things, and then they don't blame you for doing the bigger things. This is how this art of diplomacy manifests itself for those who want to be successful at the UN. And for a person like me, carrying a noble cause such as the cause of the Palestinian people, we have to do the best, and the best of how we can do it in order to ensure success.
So my next question is for you, Abdelhamid, sorry. What changes have you seen in the last 10 years with respect to your access and the responsiveness that you're getting at the UN since we obtained permanent observer status? And has that impacted attempts to silence what you're saying. And we will get into silencing Palestinian journalists generally a little bit later, but I want to stick to silence at the UN or attempts to silence you there.
Let me explain the nature of my work. So I put it in perspective. There is over 400 journalists accredited to the United Nations. These journalists represent media outlets from all over the world. There are certain media activities in the UN on a daily basis. First, there is what's called noon briefing, where the spokesperson of the UN Secretary General comes and meet with the journalists on a daily basis at 12 noon. And he would tell the latest news about the Secretary General and the UN, and then takes a question. The other activity is what's called stakeout, that when the ambassadors come out of the Security Council and they stand before the journalists and take some questions. Third, there is a media encounter. When a journalist meets an ambassador and takes him aside and takes some questions person to person. There is also something called background briefing, when ambassadors accredited to the UN representing their countries invite journalists to the mission. And they give them background briefing about their work, about their plans, about what's going on. So we have to engage all these activities. Since I became an accredited journalist, I put a pledge to myself that I will be defending the question of Palestine. That is my main task at the United Nations. So how I do that? I do that by highlighting the suffering of my people. Like, for example, when there is a hunger strike, someone is about to die, like Samir Isawi and others. So my role is to highlight that and ask why the UN is silent, why they don't say something, why the Secretary did not issue a statement. Why is the UN representative in the occupied Palestinian territory, which is his name now, Tor Winsland? I keep asking, where is Tor Winsland? Why he didn't issue a statement about the killing of this boy of 7-year-old, or that woman who was shot and killed in front of the cameras? So that is one important issue I keep asking about. And I want to tell you something, that the question is more important than the answer, because I know the answer. Like, I give you an example. Recently, I was the ambassador of the US, Linda Thomas Greenfield, came to give a press conference at the UN briefing room. That she was the president of the council, and every president of the Security Council gives a press briefing on the first day they become president. So she was answering all the questions, and I asked her this following question. I asked her why, when the Ukrainian people resist the Russian occupation, they are heroes. And when Russia bombed these buildings and train stations, they are war crimes. Israel is doing exactly the same. Why the Palestinian people, when they resist their occupiers, are called terrorists? And what Israel is doing and destroying the buildings in Gaza, including the media building, it's called self-defense. Is there more hypocrisy than that? And of course, the press conference was broadcast live. To the first time that I saw her shaken. She answered every question orally without preparation except my question. She pulled a paper and started talking about the US position on the two-state solution, which is nonsense, of course. Another question, I held the Israeli ambassador, Gilad Erdan. He gave a press encounter in front of the Security Council. He gave 2 questions to people he knows, of course, pro-Israel, and he walked away. I told him, stop. Would you take a question from a Palestinian? He went back to me and said, yes. And I said, why do you expect the Palestinian to love occupation? You're taking their land, you're putting their youth in jail, you're destroying their property, you're building settlements. is that do you want them to love occupation? Is there an occupation? And he said, there is no occupation. And of course, I asked him about this encounter between the security and the people in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And he said, oh, these security men were defending the prayers from your terrorist organization. That's what he told me. So I made a big deal out of it, and I went to the UN and put a complaint why he called me your terrorist organization. And the United Nations Correspondents Association, a very strong union, drafted a letter and sent a strong protest to the Israeli mission. This is how I defend Palestine. But my question is not only about Palestine, of course. I have to ask about many other things: Syria, Yemen, Libya, Ukraine. But I'm always focusing on this double standard. That is where I catch them. There where I cannot answer. For example, the Secretary General issued a statement condemning the killing of a settler near Nablus on 16 November 2021. A similar incident where a Palestinian was shot and killed, a civilian, and he didn't issue a statement. So that's where I catch him. Why you issued a statement condemning the Palestinian when they shot and killed a settler who is not supposed to be there? He's illegally living on illegally confiscated land. Why you don't issue a statement when a Palestinian killed in front of his home? So these things that when I put them at the spot, I always follow that with every little thing. And I also focus on the language. Because when the Palestinians do something, they use the word condemn. When the Israelis do bigger crimes, they will always say saddened, they are concerned, they feel sorry. They don't use the exact language. And I tell them there are two kinds of languages. One describes the incident, and one describes the speaker. When you say, I am saddened, or I feel appalled, you are describing yourself. But you didn't say anything about what happened. You don't condemn, you don't deplore. That is, I keep after them. So with that, I'm creating a culture. And I want to say as a fact, there are so many journalists don't ask about Palestine, and including Arab journalists. I have another colleague from Al-Arab Al-Jadid, her name is Ibtisam Azam. She sometimes, if I'm not there, she covers on the question of Palestine. But I also ask about even the behavior of the Palestinian Authority. I have to establish credibility. So when they assassinated, brutal assassination of Nizar Banat, I raised it. Why the UN doesn't say something? Why they arresting? What about when they arrested someone who was a blogger in Ramallah? I also raised that issue, and that brings my stakes or my credibility a little bit higher, because I have to be and act as an objective and a professional journalist in front of all these things. Thank you, and we will continue on that.
And Dr. Mansour, a bit of a follow-up on the question of Ukraine. Do you think that obtaining full member status at the UN without changes on the ground will change the UN reaction to Israeli incursions into Gaza and the West Bank, or is it going to be more of the same once we obtain status without actually getting change?
Well, I described some of the things that we do at the UN as part of the struggle of the Palestinian people. Abdul Hamid described other things as a journalist who is committed to Palestine, and he's a Palestinian, in the same arena of how he can defend the question of Palestine. But beyond what we do, including all of you, there is a main force that is the main decider of the fate and the future of the Palestinian people, which is our people in the occupied territory and in the refugee camps. Those are engaged in the daily struggle. Those are the people who suffer more than all of us. They are the ones who are not giving up, and they are the ones who are standing against the brutal force of the Israeli occupying authority. Now, this panel is just to describing in a narrow way the effort of a Palestinian ambassador at the UN, which is an important arena for advancing the cause of the Palestinian people, and also the perspective of journalists, in which we need more journalists to cover the so many details of the story of the Palestinian people and the injustices inflicted upon us. Now, with the collective summation of all these things, what do we do at this stage? Because the globe is changing. We did not have, about 6-7 months ago, the issue and the dynamics of Ukraine. So the dynamic of the Ukraine come and present itself, and it affects everything. Our duty, each and every one of us, from the area where we operate, is how we can adjust not to allow the question of Palestine to be marginalized in one hand, and to see new ways to progress forward, including, for example, as part of our work as officials, is to go after the Israeli criminals through the ICC and possibly through other legal mechanism of international nature, because those who commit crimes against our people should not continue to enjoy impunity and to get away with it and to act as if they are above international law. So we have to do so many things, each and every one of us. For example, although I cannot tell you what to do, you are smarter than me to know how to operate in this arena in the United States of America, where there are elected officials, where this administration is a major supporter for Israel and the occupying authority. So therefore, each and every one of us can do something that is meaningful, that would contribute to the total struggle of the Palestinian people to reach the objective of putting an end to the tragedy of the Palestinian people, and for allowing the Palestinian people to attain their inalienable national rights, including their right to self-determination, to statehood, to independence, and the right of the refugees for return and compensation. These are our collective objectives, but you know, in order to see these objectives moving forward, we need to do a lot of detailed things. I just gave examples of them, of what I do now as our agenda now, in light of what is really happening regarding Ukraine. And it is also in light of what the Israeli occupying authorities and the governments are doing, of trying to completely destroy the two-state solution through settlement activities, demolitions, expulsion of people, annexation, desecration of the holy sites, especially Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram al-Sharif, Kanisat al-Qiyamah, and so on and so forth, and the continue besieging of our people, the 2 million of them in the Gaza Strip, and making them live miserably, and every now and then they open war against them. All these things we need to document the details. All these things we keep to raise them with all the appropriate authorities, with the objective of trying to stop them, to go after those who commit these crimes and violations and breaches of international law, as a contribution for the struggle of the Palestinian people to reach our objective. So I gave you the long answer to your question. There is not one small thing that we do that will change the situation fundamentally. But we have to stay the course. We have to continue supporting our people. We have to do everything possible, everything that can gain support in the area where I work, the UN, and in the area, each and every one of you, including Abdul Hamid, in the area where you work, we need to do what we have to do.
I want to ask a follow-up question. You brought up silencing of journalists and bringing it up at the UN with respect to Nizar Banat, but I know you were recently in Palestine and you spoke to the family of Shireen Abu Akleh. What has been the response to your questions about that at the UN?
I visit Palestine frequently. I just finished, I just came back Monday. That was my third visit to Palestine. And I'm going back in 22nd of November for my fourth trip. And when I go to Palestine, I don't stay home, in fact. I truly go everywhere, especially to the families of the bereaved martyrs and prisoners. In my last trip in July, I visited the family of Samer Isawi and Ahmed Manasra, and I managed to speak to the Samer Isawi and another POW, and I recorded them and I published their encounter with me. Of course, I know the family of Shireen Abu Akla. Her brother Tony is a friend of mine, and the family, we know them for many years because her father had a travel agency, and all our village was a client of Abu Akli. So the minute happened, though, the whole country was shocked, yeah. And I went to meet Tony. We spent about 3 hours. And he was thinking of coming to the UN. I said that, look, the UN did its part. The first time probably in history that the Security Council met and eulogized a journalist like Shireen Abu Akleh. We were talking about what to do about it and how he can keep her memories alive. And now the municipality of Ramallah gonna designate an area where they're gonna build an institute after her name, which will be made of 3 sections, one for her, like a museum, and the second for training and lectures, and the third for, I think they have something else, I don't know, I forgot what it is, but 3 sections. So with the UN regarding the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, in fact, they came late. Tor Winsland issued a statement calling for immediate and transparent investigation. And we choked the spokesman why he didn't use impartial. He's asking for investigation from those who killed her. So we kept asking and asking, and he said, why the SG is silent? Why he didn't issue an immediate statement? We kept after him. He was late 12 hours, which is not, it didn't happen in other cases. He issued the statement at 6 p.m., the SG, the Secretary General, which was too long for the Secretary General to wait all that long, all these hours, to issue a statement condemning the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. Again, he avoided the word independent. They don't want to confront Israel. They call for investigation. And Riyadh, he issued immediately 3 letters, one addressed to the President of the Council and the President of the General Assembly, and to the members of the Council, and calling for immediate, transparent, impartial, comprehensive investigation. So, in fact, the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh was like an earthquake. It happened everywhere. It shook also the UN. So the UN, in order to absorb this shock, they renamed an important fellowship of Palestinian journalists that they come every year to the. Yeah,
I'll speak about that.
Yeah, it was your recommendation.
It's our.
Yeah, so they accepted that recommendation of Riyadh to name that fellowship after her, after Shireen Abu Akleh, which is very important. And still, we come back, we visit the issue because the U.S., after they accepted the Israeli army mild and evasive investigation, admitting the crime but not criminalizing anybody. So the UN also went along, and that is what sometimes really annoys us, when the UN keeps waiting until they hear what's the US position, including that the child who was murdered a few days ago, Ryan. I mean, they did not ask for immediate investigation, waiting apparently for a U.S. position on that, which the U.S. said, we want independent investigation, and they retreated from that, and they changed their mind. So this is, it's a continuous struggle in the UN. We have to keep after them. We have to pinpoint where is a double standard, where they are lacking behind, where they are trying to ignore the issue, where they're trying to marginalize the question of Palestine, which is there is a trend. For example, the ambassador of Albania gave a press conference when he became the president of the council, and he said, during my presidency, I'm going to talk about all those suffering people around the world. And he started enumerating all these people, from Rohingya to Yazidis in Iraq to the Tigris in Ethiopia. And he did not mention Palestine. Wow, that's a big thing. So I told him after he finished, sir, Mr. Ambassador, how could you? How could you forget Palestine? It's an issue on the UN agenda since its inception. And you meet every month to discuss this issue. And you forget Palestine. He couldn't say except, oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. I'm sorry. Okay, that is how. I mean, if there was no one to raise this issue, it will go away. It will disappear. There is a trend now in the UN not to highlight the suffering of the Palestinian people. And Tor Winsland is one of those really disastrous envoy that the UN had ever seen. He's always invisible. He doesn't talk about it, except when there is something as big as Shireen Abu Akleh, or, shooting a standby woman or something like big thing, so he can open his mouth. But not very, very rarely. Thank you.
Yes, I do. Here, this is another example, civil society organizations and journalists, we expect from them to raise the voice higher because they are not accountable to governments and relationship between governments. And it is very helpful, even to representatives of governments, for them to be active in certain areas and even to pressure governments, so that would be helpful in the general direction of the work of representative of governments. But with regard to Shireen Abu Akleh and prisoners, now when Shireen assassination took place, many activities were unleashed. Of course, it is our duty to take the initiative through letters and communications and meetings with the Security Council, with the Secretary General and others. And it was really amazing that the Security Council, which is not now united in any issue because of the division over Ukraine, that unanimously, with our involvement and negotiation, language and text, adopted unanimously a very ambitious, respectable, powerful statement in condemning the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh and demanding an independent, impartial investigation, and also conveying condolences to the family. And as Hamid said that he is a friend with her brother, also I am friend with her brother, and I was communicating with him continuously because I conveyed to him the condolences of the Secretary General immediately and directly. And I told him about this decision that will be adopted in the Security Council, and he appreciated that. But more importantly than all these things is that we contacted the Secretary General that the annual training program of 10 Palestinian journalists to change the name to Shireen Abu Akleh training program for young Palestinian journalists, so that will be the name as we move forward forever. In addition to that, in less than a month from now in Geneva, we're having a conference, a seminar for the Department of Public Communication, which is the information department of the United Nations. And the key title of this seminar is After Shireen Abu Akleh. In addition to that, her niece came to the United States, including the UN and including to the Association of Journalists in New York, where awards and recognitions were given to Shireen Abu Akleh as a journalist that was killed in action doing her duty. So these are like the things that you do at the governmental level, the things that you do at the civil society organizations, at the level of journalists. All of them complement each other. With regard to prisoners, I am the go-between the families of the prisoners and the Secretary General. You cannot imagine how many families they sent to me letters asking me to send them to the Secretary General on behalf of their children, including the mother of Nasser Abu Hamid, who is dying from cancer, and the Israelis deprived his family, including his mother, from visiting him for more than 1 minute. And according to medical report, he has maximum 3 months to live. And we are doing sometimes diplomatic confidential work, you don't have to announce it. And we are gently working to use the good offices of the Secretary General with the leaders of Israel to release him as quickly as possible so that he can spend the rest of his life, a few weeks, few months with his family. All these things are good things, but they do not elevate themselves to the level of those of our people who are fighting on the ground, staying the course, defending the land, not raising white flags, and showing the determination that they will continue the struggle until the attainment of our national rights. And in spite of how many people we lose, and this year we lost more than any other year since the beginning of this year, including large number of children, in the course of the brutality of the Israeli occupying forces, but yet our people are showing more determination than ever. These are the people who give us the source of strength and determination to do more than what we do for the cause of Palestine, whether at the UN, at the level of civil society organization, at the level of what you do in this country, at the level of what the journalists do, at the level of what we all do. The inspiration for us is our people who are standing tall in the ground in our national homeland in Palestine. That is the source of our strength, and for me, that is the place where they can correctly and rightfully so judge all of us of how much we do in order to advance the cause of the Palestinian people. I am proud of the fact that I am a Palestinian. I am proud that I am representing the State of Palestine at the UN. I am representing a resilient, brave people such as our people. So, this is where we are.
I just want to add one thing, that I have more freedom than Riyadh to ask and to raise issues because I'm not restricted with any diplomatic restraints. So he has to speak diplomatically with the UN representative in Palestine. I don't have to. Like when Lavrov was sitting, so I asked him, that before the Ukraine war, I asked him why Russia is so bold and strong and powerful in every issue, except when it comes to Palestine. Why this? How can you explain this warm relations with Israel? Israel go bomb Syria day in and day out, and you say nothing. So he went on and on talking about the Palestinian division, and we brought all the factions to Moscow to try to heal the division, and it went on and on and on. Recently, the ambassador of Ukraine, by the way, there was a meeting on Ukraine in the Security Council, and he went out to the stakeout, and there was around him about 50 ambassadors, most of them European, in show of support. And he was acting like a peacock, happy with all these ambassadors around him. So he gave me the question after he took many other questions that were to his liking. And they said, Your country is now is under part of it under occupation. You're fighting occupation. How could you explain that you're supporting the occupation of the Palestinian people? What moral ground that you can claim that when your country is under occupation and fighting occupation, you support the occupation of Israel? He was so annoyed, and he just said, oh, we support the two-state solution, and he kept walking. So these moments, which is in front of 50 ambassadors, these moments, I think that is very precious for the question of Palestine to be raised in this kind of context. These are just one example. I could give you more.
Yes, Abdul Hamid is a good friend of mine, but I disagree with him that diplomacy is talking nice. That is not what diplomacy is. Diplomacy is producing concrete results for your people. To produce concrete results, you use all the tactics that you think would allow you to accomplish that objective. So I talk nice, and I am friend with so many ambassadors at the UN, because if there is problem with UNRWA and we need to come up with millions of dollars to sustain our people, I need to deliver on these things. Or if there are certain massacres against our people that require staying all night long at the Security Council and for days to bring a ceasefire against our people and to stop the killing in the Gaza Strip, these are the deliverables that are the successful diplomats would produce. It's not only the nicety in terms of talking. You might talk softly, but you are carrying the baseball bat in the other hand.
I have just one more brief question for each of you, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So
I think you've just
okay. All right. Since we're running a bit behind, where's the microphone for the audience? There it is, right there.
There is. We have 3 microphones. We can.
No. Michael, if you just want to start this way and work your way down, I got 1, 2, and 3. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Majid Khouri. My question is to Ambassador Riyad. You mentioned about success in becoming a permanent, and you are working very hard with the other Security Council members. And we know, of course, a few of them are very difficult to work with, especially when it comes to Palestine. I have been in the United States since 1971. And I saw it with time becoming more controlled and owned by Zionists. America is owned and controlled by Zionists. Even the president proclaims that he is a Zionist. So I personally don't expect that you're going to ever succeed with and I'm sure you have that conviction that you will not succeed. So why the hell we don't go to the General Assembly right now rather than wait in order to become a permanent? Because being a permanent, you become a sovereign. Being a sovereign, there is a lot of things, especially at the ICC and other things that you can use against the occupation and against the State of Israel. Thank you.
Well, the first stage of changing our status gave us all what we need, including to the ICC. The ICC requires only to be a state. So in the UN system, we are a state, but not full member in the UN. It's an observer state. So the rules of procedures of the ICC to join the Rome Statute and the ICC is to be a state. We qualified and we submitted our credentials, and we are a state party to the Rome Statute, which is the constitution or the charter of the ICC. In fact, we have been elected in 2 consecutive terms as officers in the Bureau of the ICC, and we are still sitting as an officer in the Bureau of the ICC. So that stage is done in spite of the opposition of the United States and others. They can oppose, but they cannot stop you from doing everything. In the Security Council, they have the power of having the veto where they can stop you there. But in the General Assembly and in many other manifestations of the international community, including the Human Rights Council and other places, They do not have the veto power. So therefore, you're saying, that they will not give anything. I am not asking for giving. My duty is try to convince other countries that I am reasonable. I am trying to work with everyone, including the United States. If the United States representatives refuse to work with me, including in my admission, then I will be gaining more and more and more support for doing what I could possibly do in the near future with the support of large countries, bearing in mind that the atmosphere is extremely toxic because there is a bloc of about 70 countries, most of them Europeans, along with the United States, are becoming so forceful in the General Assembly around Ukraine. Creative thinking would require from any successful diplomat not to go and fight with everyone and failing miserably, but trying to show, in spite of this new dynamic as a result of Ukraine, you are still able to mobilize large number of countries. Leave it to me. أنا السنجري اللي بشتغل في هذه الشغلة. I am the plumber that deals with the details. I know the dynamic of how things are done in the General Assembly. As you were a civil engineer doing your work, you wouldn't expect from me to give you advice of how to build a building and how, really to test the strength of the columns and what have you, that you leave it to a structural engineer. So as we say in Palestinian, أعطي الخبز للخباز. Okay.
Can I just, can I make a comment? In order to admit Palestine as a fully-fledged state, it has to go first through the Security Council. GA can vote on the membership of any country upon a recommendation from the Security Council. That is where the catch. So in order to go to the General Assembly to get 2/3 vote to become full-fledged member, it has to come from the Security Council, and that's where the veto is waiting.
You had a question? If not, then the gentleman behind you is raising his hand in the yellow. Oh, all right, we'll come back around. Go ahead, you're right there.
Salim, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I know that the subject of this panel is diplomacy and the media, but I hope you allow me to ask Hamid a question about the situation on the ground. He has been there many times. Can I do that? Or yeah. Hamid, the situation, obviously, you wrote about it many times in your articles and all of that, but something you have not talked about or nobody has talked about. How long can our people sustain this situation with the ineptitude of the Palestinian Authority, the lack of support to the average individual and to the fighter? Do you feel a sense of something coming, or just people are numb?
It's a very difficult question, because if you are in Ramallah, you have the impression that nobody cares. You go to the cafes, they are full. The restaurants, wherever you go, the streets are crowded. Just peek in a gold, in a jewelry store, and you will find it completely packed. But if you go to other places, I went to the Dheisha refugee camp, I went to many parts of Palestine, Nablus, Qalqilia, Hebron. It's different. But honestly, there is a sense of despair sometimes, especially I'm saying about Ramallah. First, they don't have confidence that this leadership is taking us anywhere. And there's so much criticism of the leadership, especially about the security coordination. And the criticism of the leadership increased so much after preparing somebody called Hussein Sheikh to be the next president. And his reputation is not well respected in Palestine. However, if you sit with ordinary people, I sat with the mother of what they call her, Khansa Palestine in Qalandia. I sat with the mother of Nasser Abu Hamid, and with the family of Samr al-Isawi. That's where you can get a dose of hope and determination and resilience. I think things are boiling, brewing under the surface. Everyone is unhappy. Everyone is scared that we are sliding into an abyss. Something should be done. We can't continue like that. There are so many initiatives taking place as we speak. There is the الحملة الوطنية لإعادة بناء منظمة التحرير, the national campaign to rebuild the Palestine Liberation Organization. There is the National Alliance for Change. There is a group called طفح الكيل. Nasr al-Qidwa has also some impact. There is تجمعات ديمقراطية كثير, مسارات, that is led by Han al-Masri. And I try to reach out to them. I can see that these are like small streams pouring their little water in a bigger river, which is a change should come. I see it. And recently, one of the articles in Haaretz said the Palestinians are about, the West Bank is about to explode. They putting our people to the, pushing us to the wall. There is a genocidal war taking place as we speak. Not single day they don't kill somebody. Not one single day they don't attack cities and villages. Not one single day there is no arrest and invasion. And the settlers are doing the dirty job, especially in Al-Aqsa Mosque. How long the people gonna take that? So there is a sense of, on one hand, there is a sense of despair that we cannot do anything, and they want just to live with their daily lives and just secure their food and children. And as you see it a lot in Ramallah, but others, they don't accept this narration. There is something that I believe it should manifest itself in some kind of maybe uprising or maybe confrontation or something that started in Jenin and moving now to Nablus, and it could move to another cities, not necessarily Ramallah. Thank you.
Can I go to a comment, small comment, but then you can ask. إلك أنت.
I have a question, and I think it's really important. My reading of what's happening is that when Israel was admitted by the Security Council as a state in 1948 or 49, it was conditional on Israel to accept two resolutions by the General Assembly, which are, I think, 181 or 182 and 191. 181 and 191. Whatever. Is that correct? And if it is correct, is there anything that can be done to prove that that conditions were not met by Israel, and accordingly Israel diplomatically should not be recognized anymore as a state?
It is true. When Israel in 1948, in December 17th, did submit its application for admission, they failed, including the UK and France abstained on the recommendation of the Security Council. Then they went to a special committee of the General Assembly by the name of the Special Committee on Palestine, the SPC. And then in that committee, the representatives of Israel asked, what do you want us to do in order to acquire admission? They said that you have to implement 181 and 194. 181 is the partition plan, and 194 is the return and compensation for the refugees. They said, we are willing, we are committed to these two resolutions, and we will implement. And in May 1949, they were admitted to membership. So if you want these are the details. Of course, President Abbas, in his speech to the General Assembly this year, he said, and he instructed the Foreign Minister, Riyad Malki, to draft letters that were given to the Secretary General in a bilateral meeting between us and him about asking him to implement these resolutions. Of course, the Secretary General cannot implement these resolutions. Only governments, member states, can tell the Secretary General what to do, including if the General Assembly wants to tell the SG, yes, we trust you to go and implement Resolution 181, then he would have a mandate to do so. That's the details of it. But let me just tell you also the nuances of it for those who want to learn. Israel adjusted in order to get the admission. I know the technicality of admission, it goes not through 2 stages, 3 stages. The first one, which we passed by submitting our application to the Secretary General and the legal department. They approved, they said our application is genuine, and then they send it to the Security Council. Security Council is the second stage. It has to send a decision or recommendation saying that the Security Council recommend to the General Assembly to admit the State of Palestine for full membership. Then the General Assembly, by 2/3 majority, has to approve this recommendation. Now, our application in the Security Council, we don't have a recommendation. We could push the envelope and submit a resolution, the language of the resolution saying that the Security Council recommends the admission of the State of Palestine for membership, which would push the United States possibly to cast a veto if they say no. All these things we are reviewing, but don't underestimate us. In the UN, there are so many things other than the truncated ways of going through the path that is constricting you by the rules of procedure. I'll give you examples. When we came in 1974-75 to be an observer of the PLO in the United Nations, that is something that we created, was never, it doesn't exist, this concept of observership in the Charter or the rules of procedure. But the General Assembly, it's the master of itself. So you go to the General Assembly and saying, I want to give the PLO an observer status. If they adopt that, then the PLO get an observer status. In 1988-89, we went after the Declaration of Independence, and we went for an enhancement to change our situation from an observer entity PLO to an observer entity Palestine. We acquired that. In 1998, Nasser al-Qidwa went to the General Assembly when the negotiation of 5 years of the Oslo Agreement did not reach anywhere. He went for a further enhancement and acquire more rights in the General Assembly closer to almost membership. I'll give you an example. Full members in the General Assembly, they are entitled to 6 seats. Observers are entitled to 2. So in our enhancement in 1998, we had the right to have 6 seats. Okay? Then we also had the right to submit resolutions related to the question of Palestine and to co-sponsor resolutions related to the question of Palestine. We acquired that in a resolution. In the year 2012, we went for a further enhancement to the General Assembly to have all these things and to add to it, to change our status from an observer entity Palestine to an observer state of Palestine, which opened doors for us, the ICC and 100 treaty and convention as a state parties. I'm giving you these examples for those who will continue to block the doors before me and the windows. They are pushing me, and I'm not in a hurry. I will take my sweet time to build the front that I need to build, and I will surprise you with what I will come up with. Okay?
All right.
Okay.
All right. So last question for Doris. We're over time, but she had her hand up. Let's get the last question in, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
So my question isn't about plumbing. I appreciate what you said about that, and I appreciate your role in creatively creating conditions that could move us forward. But of course, you're aware of the conversation, global conversation about the two-state solution is dead. Now, I don't even want to discuss that because we'll go back to plumbing. What I want to discuss is the narrative that is the basis for the two-state solution or any solution. As an organizer, I have problems discussing Palestine with people for several reasons. It's not an agreed-upon narrative yet. It could be a much stronger narrative. For example, 1948, Al-Nakba, 750,000 people. Oh no, it's 850,000 people. Oh, it's nearly 1 million people. And then Al-Naqsa, which really is the same thing. It's just, these are peaks, these are spikes. It was a continuous expulsion and ethnic cleansing of Palestinian. Why do we separate it out? Just like a two-state solution. Why do we separate out the narrative of Palestine? Why can't we say it's been 2 million people or whatever that number is since 1947? Let's start with 47, before the 48 spike, before the 67 spike. Can we retell the story in a way that is much cleaner, truer, simpler, and then maybe that'll help you with the plumbing?
You raised many issues. My philosophy is, I don't tell you or tell civil society organizations or activists how to conduct their work. You know, you are totally free to, I'm coming to the guidance, and I'll tell you the guidance, and even when I tell you the guidance, I am not trying to tell you what to do, because I understand the independence, the full nature of civil society organizations and journalists, that you are totally independent to advocate what you like to advocate. I don't tell you what to do, and I expect in return not to tell me how to conduct my work, for example, at the United Nations. Having said that, I did not finish what I want to say.
Let him finish.
Yeah, I am saying it's not the same thing. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying she is completely free to articulate the position she wishes. You know, it's not the same. But let me just tell you from where we work and what I think is in the interest of the Palestinian people in the place where I work. The Palestinian people suffered and paid dearly to have a global consensus. Global consensus, the only issue at the UN where there is global consensus outside approval of the charter and the resolutions is the global consensus on the two-state solution, which means that Israel has to withdraw from the land that it occupied in 1967. And there is global consensus on settlements as illegal. On pragmatic basis for me, why should I throw away this massive global consensus at the UN and try, you know, really to discuss something outside of it? The Israelis did, but the Israelis are not dictating the course of the international community. What dictates the course of the international community is the global consensus, which we are part of, and all countries are part of, including the United States. I realize...
You guys, let's not have a conversation back and forth.
Now, I realize there is a difference between what they agreed to and what they are acting and doing. I realize that, of course, it's obvious. But what I'm saying, for me, in order really to corner them more, I don't start from controversial issues because they will have advantage over me. I corner them from what they agreed to as global consensus, although maybe they are not genuine and they are supporting something to the opposite of the global consensus. طيب روح شمر عند رعانك وروح سوي انتفاضة هنا.
These are discussions you can have offline.
Okay.
I think we're going to wrap it up for today. I think we are. Is there one more question out there? But when we have a question, we can't have a back and forth. So I think we're 15 minutes over. So I think we're going to have to call it, and then you guys can chat afterwards if you want. If anybody's willing to stick around for questions afterwards. That's a very long question, I think.
Where we go from here, each one to do their work. Each one to do their work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we let's thank our panelists, everyone. Thank you for your time today.